It was June 30th, 2009, just before midnight, when Private First Class Bo Bergdahl walked away from his observation post in the Paktika province of Afghanistan, leaving his rifle behind, carrying only a compass, a knife, water, and a notebook filled with writings about duty and disillusionment. He would not be seen by American forces again for 5 years. By the time he vanished into the darkness beyond the wire, stepping past the final checkpoint where his fellow soldiers assumed he was pulling guard duty, Bergdahl had already become a ghost. A man so consumed by questions about the war, about his role, about the meaning of service, that he chose to walk into enemy territory alone, unarmed, in what would become the most controversial disappearance in the Afghan war. What happened in the hours and days that followed would transform Bergdahl from an unknown private into the center of a national debate about duty, desertion, and the costs of a war that had already stretched beyond reason. But before he became a symbol, before the politicians and pundits turned his name into ammunition for their arguments, before the diplomatic negotiations and the prisoner exchanges and the court-martial proceedings, Bo Bergdahl was simply a soldier who walked away from his post in Helmand Province. Though he actually left from Paktika, the confusion about his location would persist for years. Another layer of mystery in a story that defied simple explanation and disappeared into a war zone, where the Taliban controlled the night and mercy was a concept that existed only in memory. The story of Bo Bergdahl is not clean. It does not fit neatly into categories of hero or traitor, victim or villain. It is a story about a young man raised in rural Idaho, homeschooled in conservative Christian values, who joined the military seeking purpose and found instead a grinding machinery of war that seemed to him devoid of the honor and mission he had imagined. It is a story about choices made. Kill him if they discover the truth, and the absolute moral conviction that deceiving murderers is not sin but the highest form of righteousness, that protecting the innocent by any means necessary is exactly what his faith demands, that he would rather die maintaining these lies than live with the guilt of betraying people who trusted him for protection. The battle begins now, not with weapons, but with words, not with violence, but with coordinated deception so sophisticated it will take historians decades to fully understand how an entire community maintained conspiracy without a single betrayal. Not with soldiers, but with farmers who know exactly how to claim ignorance, teachers who know exactly how to forge papers, children who know exactly how to recite false identities, an entire population trained through 3 years of constant practice in the art of looking innocent while committing organized fraud on a massive scale. 3 days. 400 SS soldiers equipped with weapons, legal authority, and experience breaking civilian resistance across Europe. 3,000 French civilians equipped with nothing but lies, false documents, and the collective determination that protecting refugees matters more than personal safety. One conspiracy so successful that the SS will eventually leave convinced their intelligence was wrong, never realizing they were defeated not by lack of evidence, but by evidence so thoroughly hidden and protected by universal silence that finding it was impossible. Schmaling expects this to be simple. A small village, isolated, poor, populated by Protestant farmers who should crack under SS interrogation. His orders are clear. His methods are proven. His confidence is absolute. He has no idea what he's about to face. No idea that every door he knocks on will open to practiced lies. No idea that every child he questions has been drilled on cover stories since age 6. No idea that every document he inspects is potentially expert forgery. We're suspicious at best, actively hostile at worst. The mission objectives were vague: establish presence, conduct patrols, engage when engaged, the kind of reactive posture that characterizes wars without clear goals or exit strategies. Bergdahl's disillusionment grew rapidly. He saw incompetence in his officers. He believed the unit's tactics were endangering soldiers unnecessarily. He felt that the Afghan civilians they were supposed to be protecting viewed them as invaders rather than liberators. In emails and journal entries, his language became increasingly desperate. He wrote about wanting to walk to India. He wrote about needing to prove something, though what exactly was never quite clear even to him. He wrote about duty and honor and sacrifice, but his definitions of these terms were drifting away from military orthodoxy into something more personal and ultimately more dangerous. On June 27th, 3 days before he disappeared, Bergdahl sent his belongings home. He shipped his laptop and personal items to his parents in Idaho. This fact would later be used as evidence that his departure was premeditated, that whatever happened on June 30th was not an impulsive act, but a planned desertion. But the truth, as much as it can be reconstructed from fragmentary evidence and contradictory testimony, seems more complicated than simple desertion. Bergdahl appears to have convinced himself that he could walk to a nearby forward operating base, report the problems he perceived in his unit directly to senior commanders, and somehow trigger an investigation that would address his concerns. It was a plan born of naivety and isolation, the kind of thinking that emerges when a young man in a war zone spends too much time alone with his thoughts and not enough time understanding the realities of military bureaucracy and Taliban-controlled territory. Just before midnight on June 30th, Bergdahl walked away from Observation Post Mest. The exact sequence of events is disputed. Some accounts say he left during a guard shift, others that he simply wandered off during a lull in activity. What is undisputed is that he left his rifle, his armor, most of his equipment. He took water, a compass, a knife, his notebook. He did not tell anyone where he was going. Within hours, he was reported missing. The response was immediate and massive. The military launched what would become the largest search operation for a missing soldier in the Afghan War. Thousands of troops were diverted from other missions. Aircraft flew round-the-clock reconnaissance. Special operations teams conducted raids based on intelligence about his possible location. For weeks, the search consumed resources and put other soldiers at risk as they patrolled dangerous areas looking for any sign of the missing private. But Bergdahl was already beyond their reach. Within hours of leaving his post, he had been captured by Taliban fighters. The exact circumstances of his capture remain unclear. Bergdahl's own accounts have been inconsistent, shaped by trauma, possibly by coaching from his captors, certainly by the need to make sense of what had happened to him. Some reports suggest he approached an Afghan village asking for help and was turned over to the Taliban. Others suggest he was simply discovered by a patrol. What is certain is that by the morning of July 1st, less than 12 hours after disappearing, Bergdahl was a prisoner of the Taliban, beginning a captivity that would last 60 months. The soldiers who had served with Bergdahl, who now found themselves searching for him in some of the most dangerous terrain in Afghanistan, experienced a complex mix of emotions. Initial concern for a missing comrade quickly gave way to anger as details emerged suggesting he had left voluntarily. That anger intensified with each patrol through Taliban territory, with each IED discovered, with each ambush survived. 6 soldiers would die in the weeks and months following Bergdahl's disappearance while conducting operations in areas where intelligence suggested he might be held. Whether those operations were directly caused by the search for Bergdahl or would have occurred anyway became a matter of fierce debate, but the soldiers who conducted them had no doubt. They believed they were risking their lives searching for a deserter, and that belief created a rage that would last for years. The military, for its part, maintained public silence about the circumstances of Bergdahl's disappearance. He was listed as missing captured, technically a prisoner of war, which meant his service continued, his pay continued. He continued to receive promotions based on time in service even while in captivity. This bureaucratic normalcy felt grotesque to the soldiers who knew the truth, who believed Bergdahl had abandoned them and was now being treated as a hero while they risked their lives trying to find him. For Bergdahl, captivity was a descent into a hell that would break him physically and psychologically. The Taliban moved him constantly, keeping him in cages barely large enough for his body, in dark rooms where he lost track of time, in conditions of isolation so complete that he later said he forgot how to speak English for periods, could not remember his own name, existed in a state of depersonalization where his identity dissolved and he became simply a body waiting for the next beating, the next interrogation, the next move to another hidden location. His captors released several videos of him over the years, propaganda tools used to embarrass the United States and provide proof of life. In these videos, Bergdahl appears pale, thin, frightened, reading statements clearly written by his captors about American imperialism and the need to withdraw from Afghanistan. His parents would watch these videos with a mixture of relief that he was alive and horror at seeing their son reduced to this. Back in the United States, the Bergdahl family became advocates for their son's release. His father, Bob Bergdahl, grew a long beard in solidarity with his son's captivity and learned basic Pashto and Dari to understand the culture, holding his son. He became a vocal presence on social media and in interviews, pushing the government to do more to secure Bo's release. This advocacy would later make the family targets for criticism from those who believe Bo was a deserter who didn't deserve rescue efforts. The military and intelligence community worked quietly for years on efforts to recover Bergdahl. Negotiations with the Taliban were complicated by the fact that the United States did not officially negotiate with terrorists, though back-channel communications continued through intermediaries, primarily the government of Qatar. The Taliban's asking price was high. The release of 5 senior Taliban commanders held at Guantanamo Bay. For years, this trade was considered unacceptable. The American government would not exchange high-value prisoners for a soldier whose disappearance was suspected to be desertion. But by 2014, several factors converged to make the exchange politically feasible. The war in Afghanistan was winding down. American combat operations were officially ending. There was political pressure to close Guantanamo Bay and reduce the prisoner population there. And there was growing concern that Bergdahl's health was deteriorating in captivity, that if they did not act soon, he might not survive to be recovered at all. On May 31, 2014, in a carefully coordinated exchange, Bergdahl was released to American forces in Afghanistan. In exchange, the 5 Taliban commanders, senior leaders who had been held at Guantanamo Bay for over a decade, were transferred to Qatar where they were to remain under monitoring. The exchange was: his parents would watch these videos with a mixture of relief that he was alive and horror at seeing their son reduced to this. Back in the United States, the Bergdahl family became advocates for their son's release. His father, Bob Bergdahl, grew a long beard in solidarity with his son's captivity and learned basic Pashto and Dari to understand the culture, holding his son. He became a vocal presence on social media and in interviews, pushing the government to do more to secure Bo's release. This advocacy would later make the family targets for criticism from those who believe Bo was a deserter who didn't deserve rescue efforts. The military and intelligence community worked quietly for years on efforts to recover Bergdahl. Negotiations with the Taliban were complicated by the fact that the United States did not officially negotiate with terrorists, though back-channel communications continued through intermediaries, primarily the government of Qatar. The Taliban's asking price was high. The release of 5 senior Taliban commanders held at Guantanamo Bay. For years, this trade was considered unacceptable. The American government would not exchange high-value prisoners for a soldier whose disappearance was suspected to be desertion. But by 2014, several factors converged to make the exchange politically feasible. The war in Afghanistan was winding down. American combat operations were officially ending. There was political pressure to close Guantanamo Bay and reduce the prisoner population there. And there was growing concern that Bergdahl's health was deteriorating in captivity, that if they did not act soon, he might not survive to be recovered at all. On May 31, 2014, in a carefully coordinated exchange, Bergdahl was released to American forces in Afghanistan. In exchange, the 5 Taliban commanders, senior leaders who had been held at Guantanamo Bay for over a decade, were transferred to Qatar where they were to remain under monitoring. The exchange was done without congressional notification, which would become one of several political controversies surrounding the case. President Obama announced the release in a Rose Garden ceremony with Bergdahl's parents, framing it as the successful return of a prisoner of war, invoking the military principle that America leaves no soldier behind. The political reaction was swift and vicious. Republicans accused the administration of negotiating with terrorists, of paying too high a price for a suspected deserter, of releasing dangerous enemy combatants who would return to the fight. Democrats defended the decision, arguing that the circumstances of Bergdahl's capture were irrelevant to the obligation to recover prisoners of war. Bergdahl was flown to Germany for medical evaluation. The physical damage was extensive but mendable. He was severely malnourished, had gastrointestinal problems, his body showed signs of repeated beatings. The psychological damage was deeper and less visible. He had spent 5 years in conditions of severe deprivation and stress. He had been beaten regularly. He had been kept in isolation. He had lost the ability to function in normal social situations. He suffered from what would be diagnosed as severe post-traumatic stress disorder, complicated by the trauma of captivity and the knowledge that his return to America would not be a hero's welcome, but rather a return to judgment. Within weeks of his return, it became clear that Bergdahl would face military justice. The investigation into his disappearance, which had been conducted while he was in captivity but kept sealed, was now unsealed, and its findings made available to commanders deciding how to proceed. The evidence was damning from a military justice perspective. Bergdahl had left his post voluntarily, had abandoned his weapon and equipment, had done so during a time of war in a hostile area. These facts, regardless of his subsequent captivity, constituted potential violations of the uniform. Disappearance was compromised by the stresses of combat and pre-existing psychological issues that the military had failed to properly diagnose, and that the government bore some responsibility for deploying a soldier who was not mentally fit for the stress of combat operations. The prosecution argued that Bergdahl's suffering in captivity, however severe, did not excuse his initial act of leaving his post, that soldiers had died as a direct result of his actions, and that military discipline required punishment to maintain the principle that desertion in combat would not be tolerated under any circumstances. In October 2017, the military judge found Bergdahl guilty of both charges but sentenced him to a dishonorable discharge, reduction in rank to private, and a fine of $1,000 per month for 10 months. There was no prison time. The judge cited Bergdahl's suffering in captivity and his mental health issues as mitigating factors that made a lengthy prison sentence unjust. The sentence was controversial. Soldiers who had searched for Bergdahl felt it was too lenient, while Bergdahl's defenders argued that any punishment beyond what he had already endured was excessive. What the legal proceedings could not address, what no verdict could resolve, was the deeper question of what Bergdahl's story revealed about the war in Afghanistan and about the young men sent to fight it. Bergdahl was not the only soldier to question the mission, to feel that the war lacked clear purpose or achievable goals. He was not the only one to struggle with the gap between the idealistic notions of service he had brought to the military and the grinding reality of a counterinsurgency campaign that seemed to produce casualties without producing progress toward any discernible objective. What made Bergdahl different was not his doubts, but his response to them. While other soldiers processed their disillusionment through dark humor, through cynicism, through simply enduring until their deployment ended, Bergdahl acted on his doubts in a way that was both dramatically self-destructive and profoundly disruptive to his unit. His disappearance created consequences that rippled across the entire command structure, consumed resources, endangered other soldiers, and ultimately resulted in a prisoner exchange that was criticized as politically motivated and strategically questionable. The soldiers who served with Bergdahl, who searched for him, who lost comrades in operations conducted in areas where he might be held, never forgave him. To them, whatever his intentions, whatever his mental state, whatever his sufferings in captivity, he remained fundamentally a deserter who had abandoned them in combat and whose actions had put them in unnecessary danger. The fact that he received a light sentence, that some defended him as a troubled young man failed by his command, that his father was given a platform to advocate for prisoner exchanges. All of this felt like a betrayal of the soldiers who had done their duty without complaint, who had completed their deployments, who had lived with the injuries and trauma and losses without ever considering walking away. Bergdahl himself, in the years after his court-martial, has lived in obscurity. He has given few interviews. He has not sought to justify or explain his actions beyond what he said during the legal proceedings. He lives with the consequences of the worst decision of his life, the decision to walk away from his post on that June night in 2009, and with the knowledge that his actions cost lives, destroyed careers, damaged his family, and made him a symbol of everything divisive about the Afghan war. But his story, uncomfortable as it is, represents something true about that war and about all wars that extend beyond their initial justifications into years of grinding attrition without clear purpose. Wars produce soldiers like Bo Bergdahl, young men and women who enlist with idealistic notions about service and honor, who encounter a reality that bears no resemblance to their expectations, and who lack the emotional resources or institutional support to process that gap between expectation and reality in healthy ways. The military, for its part, made changes after Bergdahl's disappearance. Screening processes for recruits were reviewed. Mental health support for deployed soldiers was expanded. Training on the consequences of desertion was enhanced. But the fundamental problem remained. How do you sustain morale and discipline in a war that lacks clear objectives, in operations that seem disconnected from national security, in deployments that ask young soldiers to risk their lives for missions they do not understand and cannot explain to themselves or their families? Bergdahl's disappearance highlighted this problem but did not solve it. If anything, it made the problem more visible and more uncomfortable. Here was a soldier who, rather than quietly enduring his disillusionment like thousands of others, acted on it in a way that forced everyone, the military, the government, the public, to confront the reality that not all soldiers believe in the missions they are asked to execute, that some question the war even while they are fighting it, and that these questions do not make them cowards or traitors, but rather human beings struggling with moral and practical dilemmas that have no easy answers. The last American soldier who vanished in Helmand, though he actually vanished from Paktika, the geographic confusion itself becoming part of the mythology, was not a hero. He was not a villain. He was a young man who made a catastrophic error in judgment, who paid for that error with 5 years of captivity and torture, who returned to a country that could not decide whether he was a victim or a criminal, and who now lives with the knowledge that his name will forever be associated with one of the most controversial episodes of America's longest war. His story does not offer comfort or clear moral lessons. It does not resolve cleanly into categories of right and wrong. It is messy and painful and complicated, like the war itself, like all wars that extend beyond the initial clear purposes into years of ambiguous objectives and accumulating costs. Bo Bergdahl walked into the darkness beyond the wire on June 30th, 2009, and disappeared into a war that had already disappeared from the consciousness of most Americans, that continued grinding forward without clear purpose or end, that consumed lives and resources and moral certainty until all that remained were individual stories of men and women trying to survive and make sense of something that ultimately made no sense at all. And perhaps that is the real story of the last American soldier who vanished in Helmand. Not the details of what happened to him, not the legal proceedings or the political controversies, but the fact that his disappearance revealed something true about a war that America was fighting without fully understanding why, that soldiers were dying in without being able to explain what their deaths accomplished. And that would continue for another 12 years after Bergdahl walked away, producing more casualties, more questions, and more stories like his of young people sent to war and broken by it in ways that would last long after the deployments ended. The sun rose over Afghanistan on July 1st, 2009, just as it had every morning of the war, indifferent to the young American soldier who had vanished into Taliban captivity hours earlier, indifferent to the search operations that would follow, indifferent to the debates and controversies and consequences that would ripple across years and presidencies. The war continued, as wars do, grinding forward without regard for the individuals caught in its machinery, until eventually it ended not with victory or resolution, but with withdrawal and a return to the same chaos that had preceded American involvement. And somewhere in that ending, in that final accounting of costs and accomplishments, the story of Bo Bergdahl disappeared into the larger tragedy of a war that consumed so much and accomplished so little, that asked so many to sacrifice and could not explain what they were sacrificing for, that vanished not into the night but into history, remembered but not understood, mourned but not resolved.